Since writing is pretty much a socially distant exercise, the requirement to be distanced was not necessarily a bad thing for me as a writer, though of course the reason for it is. And speaking of that, unfortunately, we all learn about suffering and loss in this life. None of us escape that, unless you're a complete narcissist, like someone we won't mention right now. So some people learn those lessons way, way too early. Most of us do somewhat later. I was 37 when I learned my hardest lessons. When my husband of just 3 years died in a small plane crash on a cold November night, but his plane and his body weren't found for a month. The search and the aftermath of grief were the darkest times that I've ever known. And one of the things that struck me was how the rest of the world went on as if everything was just fine, when my world was utterly shattered. And that sense of isolation, say even in the midst of a crowded airport, was truly stunning to me. What's so different about this time is this time of the coronavirus pandemic and healthcare and economic insecurity, this time of a long overdue reckoning on racial injustice in this country, this time of hellish wildfires across the West. What's different is that so many of us are suffering alone together, as the title of the anthology that I'm going to read from talks about. What I learned was that by putting one foot in front of the other, quite literally, I was able to ever so slowly move forward with my life and define myself, at least in part, by the strength I had gained, not only the pain that was forged from it, or that forged it. There we go. Anyway, these past few months, I asked myself probably dozens of times why it took a pandemic to get me back onto the trails that had fortified me then. And the truth is I don't know. I just let myself get too busy to make the time to do what I know strengthens me. So I'm grateful for the pause, not the reason for it, but for the pause that the pandemic has given me to find my footing again. So I'm going to read from my essay titled Finding My Footing from Alone Together. And I've actually added a little bit back in that has a little more about rocks in it because I had to take it out due to word count limitations in the book. And since I am a geologist, thank you for indulging me and letting me add a few more rocks back into the story. Standing on a piece of land in Placitas, New Mexico, a place I'd never been, I felt I had come home. To the southeast, the Sandia Mountains towered. To the northwest, lava flows stair-stepped to the Jemez Range. I stretched myself as far as I could to buy those few acres of desert. This place, not a bank account, would be my safety net. I lived on the land in an old RV while building a house of adobe, wood, and stone, the structure intensifying my connection to the land rather than separating me from it. Each morning, I tramped the foothill trails. I picked up rocks, and they told me the story of the landscape. Eruptions, erosion, intrusion, metamorphism, transgression, regression, and rifting. The poetry of geology had never spoken to me so personally, but my life had never shifted in such tectonic proportions before. Of all the rocks, the bits of schist spoke to me most. It had been a Proterozoic shale, dull and gray, before intense heat and pressure recrystallized it into the shimmering stones that caught the sunlight. I had been someone else, but in my grief felt dull and gray. I found my footing on the rocky trails in the shadow of the Sandias more than 1 billion years in the making. Understanding Earth's deep time and ceaseless motion made me feel insignificant in the best possible way, and free to create a metamorphosed life. So in the intervening years, which was more than 20 of them, I somehow lost that deep connection to the land that was right outside my door and considered moving into Albuquerque rather than driving back and forth to the city and to the airport so frequently. But here's what happened to me this spring. Now on stay-at-home orders to slow the spread of COVID-19, I'm clear that moving away is not the answer. Moving less is, at least by car and plane. I need to hike the foothills, write in my beloved library, and share suppers each evening with my boyfriend, our plates on the gleaming Madeira limestone countertop that ties this house so solidly to the Sandias. Reconnected, I can't imagine losing the quiet, the space, and the blessed dark of the night skies. I wonder how many others are rediscovering their heart's home or finding they live someplace that isn't home at all. Here, again, I both grieve and find peace in this uncertain time. But aren't all times uncertain? The life I was sure of decades ago shifted irrevocably in one short phone call. And aren't these months less than a blink of an eye in geologic time? In this particular blink is an opportunity. I look inside and out with sadness and trepidation, but also with hope and curiosity at the metamorphosis underway, both inside and out. So thank you.
Yay, excellent reading, Deb. Thank you so much for sharing your work. You really put me on those trails up there around Placitas, seeing through your eyes as a geologist. All right, next up, we're gonna go with Pam Houston. Pam also has some work in Alone Together, and she's featured with Amy Irvine in a new book coming out from Torrey House called Airmail, which are letters that they have written back and forth during the pandemic. So I know she's been doing a lot of writing. Pam is the author of several books. Deep Creek was one of my favorite books a couple of years ago, an award-winning, just bomb of a memoir, Deep Creek, Finding Hope in the High Country. She's also the author of Contents May Have Shifted and Sighthound, as well as short stories and the most excellent Cowboys Are My Weakness and Waltzing the Cat. We've been pleased to host Pam over the years. As, in addition to being an award-winning author, she's also a wonderful teacher who teaches at the IAIA right now and does a lot of workshops around the country, spreading her knowledge of writing to students far and wide. So Pam Houston, thank you so much for joining us. You want to tell us the name of your piece?
There we go. Yes, I can. My piece from Alone Together is called Stamina. And the Alone Together is kind of an interesting organizational book. Jennifer divided it into 5 sections: what now, grieve, comfort, connect, and do not stop. And I was happy to find myself in do not stop because I'm sort of a Capricorn and an only child, and I'm a goat walking up a hill slowly. And so I'm in the last section of the book, the do not stop section. And I think, I mean, it's a pretty short essay, so I'm going to try to read the whole thing. But if it seems like I'm going over my time, I have some cuts marked. So this is called Stamina. I will say about this, just so you guys know, like, this anthology came together like that. I mean, Jennifer Haupt was amazing, and all the money from it is going to support independent bookstores. And she just got a whole trainload of writers on board, and we wrote these things in about 2 weeks. And I just really commend her for, you know, taking action instead of sitting around feeling despair, which, you know, we've all done some of too. But in any case, this is called Stamina, Memorial Day Weekend, 2020. A lamb was born here on Saturday, a little ram. And when I say little, I mean it. He was a preemie, born late in the spring, conceived a month after the usual end of mating season. The last thing we need around here is another ram. We have 2 already. And though they are best friends, they spend most of their time with the tops of their heads grotesquely bloodied, doing to each other exactly as their name suggests. Sometimes, for fun, they ram me, taking me down from behind at the knees. These are Icelandic sheep, which are, any shearer will confirm, the wildest of the domestic breeds. The rams have large circular horns, big enough to do some damage. My Icelandics have fought off coyotes, a mountain lion, and a black bear, and though some of them lost the battle, some of them, including Elsie, the mother of this little preemie, won, which is why she is alive to birth another ram, which, as I mentioned, is the last thing we need. It is the ewes who protect the herd from predators, while the rams, the ones with the great big horns, cower in the back. It is also the ewes who protect their babies from the very rams who sired them. I have seen a ram toss a newborn into the air minutes after birth. Luckily, lambs bounce. The ranchers in this valley will tell you it is only the male lambs the rams go after in order to cut down competition. But I have seen a ram lift a tiny mewling female into the air likewise, and as I was running to separate them, I have seen the ewe, 5 minutes postpartum, pin that ram, who weighs a third again as much as she does, to the ground. Saturday's lamb was the tiniest ever, and more than a little listless, not eager to nurse. Icelandics always give birth mid-morning, so the baby has the maximum hours of warmth and daylight to get steady on his feet and well-fed. Over the course of the long afternoon, I prompted the little ram to nurse successfully at least twice, but Elsie wasn't doing much to encourage him, which made me think she had already given him up for dead. There is always the thought when a ewe shows little interest that she might know more than I do, might know the lamb has some genetic defect or that one of his internal systems isn't right. I live at high altitude, so even this far into May, the temperature was forecast to dip into the low 20s. After nightfall, Elsie wasn't even trying to keep the little ram warm, and he was too out of it to seek comfort himself. I bundled up in my fleece-lined pants, my down parka, and wool hat to sleep in the barn with Elsie and her baby. Why didn't I take the baby into the warm house with me? I was still hoping Elsie wouldn't reject him outright. Bottle babies are a lot of fun, but they rarely get the nutrition and antibodies they need to thrive. What you learn on a ranch is that the sweetest things die. And there are few things in the world sweeter than the tight, tight curls of a newborn Icelandic sheep, or the warm breath that rises up and out of him, or when he licks your chin with his tiny pink tongue. A year from now, should this baby live, he will be big and strong enough to break my kneecaps. But this summer, he will bound around the pasture chasing butterflies, baaing his sweet high-pitched baa, and tumbling through the grass with his older girl cousins. Most of my neighbors would tell you I had already gone too far in trying to save him, that I should always let nature take its course. But I am not a rancher. I am a writer, a teacher, a progressive, an activist, a woman who raises Icelandic sheep and names them. COVID-19 has kept me home for 3 solid months and connected me more intensely than ever to my animals. Sleeping in the barn with the preemie feels like a natural extension of all that. Elsie bedded down away from the lamb. I lowered myself to the ground with my back against a haystack and pulled the baby onto my lap. He snuggled into my down jacket, making little sucking sounds. Every time he wanted up, I let him, but then he would just stand there staring at the wall and swaying. So I would scoop him back up and he'd bed down again. At first light, I got him to nurse a little, but Elsie wouldn't stand still long enough for him to get much milk. By 8 a.m., he had lost the use of his back legs and was shaking no matter how tight I held him, a sure sign he was starving to death. There is no substitute for authentic ewe's milk, but I went to the house and mixed up some Save-A-Lamb milk replacer. The baby was too weak to suck, too weak by then to care, so I force-fed him, not with a tube, just with a bottle. I forced the nipple in his mouth and rubbed his throat to make him swallow and didn't let him out of my lap until 2 ounces of the milk was gone. With newborns, if you're going to see improvement with milk replacer, you usually see it quickly. I wasn't seeing much. He had stopped shaking, but his eyes were dull and he was still unwilling to stand. By that time, I'd decided if he was going to die, I could give him some comfort while he did it. I rocked him and kissed his lanolin-smelling head, his sweet little nubbins of horns. He weighed almost nothing. Elsie watched me, a little coldly, I thought, from her corner of the enclosure. "What do you know that I don't?" I asked her, but she just chewed her cud. I didn't know what was wrong with the little ram, but I did know that 100,000 Americans would be dead from COVID-19 by the end of the weekend. I knew the real number was actually higher because several states, Florida, Georgia, Texas, had been cooking their COVID-19 books. I knew the vast majority of the dead, grandmothers and grandfathers, husbands and wives, doctors and nurses, daughters and sons, had died without their loved ones there beside them. And I knew tens of thousands of those deaths were unnecessary, due only to the colossal failure, perhaps intentional, of the Trump administration and its enablers in the GOP. I knew our government was being deliberately dismantled from within. I knew that by virtue of being an outspoken woman, I was no longer safe here at my beloved ranch. And I also knew that on a scale of who is and who is not safe in this country, I fared infinitely better than most. I knew that it was long past time for those selfish and shameful men to relinquish control of this country into the hands of women. I knew it was time for women to step into the power they have been gaslighted out of believing was theirs all along. I knew I had some role in that perhaps we all did, and I knew I needed to figure out what it was. I spent all day Sunday in the barn and force-fed that little ram 6 more times, 2 ounces every 2 hours. He got so sick of me shoving the rubber nipple into his mouth that the 7th time he got up, bobbed and weaved over to Elsie and started nursing. I spent Sunday night in the barn too, but by then he was toddling around again and Elsie was showing a bit more interest. Mostly he slept curled up against her, coming over to sniff at me once an hour or so, maybe making sure I was warm enough. By Monday morning, it seemed for the first time that the little ram might make it. Before the day was over, a Minneapolis policeman named Derek Chauvin would kneel on the neck of George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, killing him. When I was a girl, my father broke many things that belonged to me, my femur and my hymen, to name the 2 most significant. He crumpled 16 of his cars around my body and his own, driving drunk and careless and angry. Then there was the psychological torture. See any Trump tweet of the last 72 hours, of any 72 hours, which I still insist was the worst torture of all. Surviving my father's house took hypervigilance and wiliness, the ability to separate my mind from whatever was being done to my body. Most of all, it took stamina, 17 years of it. The drumbeat always in my head saying, keep your eyes open, plan for the worst case scenario, stay alive at any cost, survive long enough to get out. By first light on Tuesday, the little ram's legs worked perfectly. I spent parts of the next 3 days and nights in the barn, and then it warmed up enough to send me back to my own bed. Now he's a week old, skipping across the outdoor enclosure, bouncing off the walls of the stall, crawling all over Elsie and ramming the holy hell out of the water trough. He weighs 4 times what he did last Saturday. And when I lift him, I feel his warm, rounded belly full. The milk replacer is closed up and put away for another year. And even now, every time he sees me, he runs straight over to Elsie to nurse. I'm not any sort of hero. I saved the little ram because I thought maybe I could. I saved him because none of my heartfelt writing, nor my activism, nor my passionate progressive values could save George Floyd. I saved him because cities are burning all across my country, and because a man I can't keep straight anymore from my dead father promised to do this to us, and now he's doing it every day. I saved the lamb to mitigate, if slightly, the wave of grief that is raining down on us, to prove to myself that I have both the strength and the stamina to save at least one small, fragile thing. I left my father's house when I was 17 and did not expect to find myself back in it at 58, along with my 330 million brothers and sisters. To beat COVID-19, to beat these soulless goons whose endgame is always cruelty for cruelty's sake, we are going to have to play the long game, all of us together, even if the men with the big horns cower in the back. I can't run quite as fast as I used to, nor kick quite as hard, but what I haven't lost over the decades is stamina. Sleeping in the barn for a week to save a lamb whose mother left it for dead may not sound like much, but my mother left me for dead too, so often, in my father's bed. And now you ought to see how I can ram a water trough. You ought to see how I still bounce. Elsie looks at me with a little more respect these days than she used to. In the wilds of Iceland, she might have had to abandon that baby. But here she has a barn full of hay, and a woman just tenacious enough to believe she can save anything. Maybe some lives, maybe democracy. This morning, and only this morning, I named the little ram Tank.
Nice. Thank you, Pam. Thank you for sharing your different viewpoints on stamina. You're becoming quite the expert at it. We're looking forward to your reading as well with Amy. We're going to be hosting Pam and Amy Irvine on October 20th at 6 p.m. There's the Airmail book, put out by Torrey House, which is an excellent environmental nature press that just does wonderful, wonderful books. So we're excited for that. Thank you. All right, now we're going to change it up with something a little different. We have some poetry coming. Margaret Randall, poet, feminist activist, photographer, memoirist, author of more than 150 published books. I'm not sure anyone has ever been busier writing than Miss Margaret Randall. We're super pleased to have her here today. She's going to be reading some new poems that just came out from Wings Press, her longtime poetry publisher. As you can see, she's got some beautiful artwork featured behind her from Barbara Byers, who's also on the call. This artwork has been some of my absolute favorite to look at almost daily during the pandemic. So thank you as well, Barbara. Margaret, would you like to read some poetry to us?
Sure would. Thank you, Amanda. That was just beautiful, Deborah and Pam. Thank you so much for those readings. And thank you for this invitation to read at this virtual event and in such excellent company. I just want to say that Bookworks is an Albuquerque treasure. We need to support the store during this difficult time so it'll be around when we emerge from the pandemic, look around and welcome back those pieces of our lives that remain. So I want to read a few poems from my book, Starfish on a Beach, the pandemic poems, which Amanda mentioned. It'll be out on October 1st from Wings Press. I wrote these poems during the pandemic, motivated by it. It was sort of changing our lives every day. And this first poem is called We Do Not Know. Some point to reduced CO2, wildlife returning to lands where humans don't crowd them out. Some foretell end times, apocalyptic prophecies announcing a doom we deserve because we have sinned in the eyes of some vengeful God, or are queer or free thinking, or simply believe in science. The truth is, we do not know how this crisis will end or what will be left when it stops breathing down our necks, threatening every inhalation with unseen droplets of infection. We want to paint a picture of hope, avoid despair alongside sickness and death. We want to believe this terror will change our future for the better. We just don't know. What we do know is words have meanings, and we must aim our messages straight as arrows into the hearts of those who hope to profit from this pain. This one is called Memory Tries to Get Our Attention. Memory wanders the earth in this era of pandemic and fear. She whispers stories of past plagues, reminds us of holocausts and genocides, tells us this too shall pass. Memory tries to get our attention with books, songs, graphs, even humor, assures us the friendly touch we miss today will still be there tomorrow. But memory herself is exhausted, battered by an onslaught of mixed messages, history books with missing chapters, biased news reports, and self-proclaimed scribes. She insists she's as timely as science, and hope tries to take her seat at the table of experts, get us to see her for who she is at a time when she knows she is needed as never before. I listen to memory calling. I ask our elders for her tales of pain and heroics, kindness and relevance. She will take your hand if you give her yours. This one is called One Part Dread to Two of Calm. Making my way across the debris fields separating sleep from the high desert landscape of my day, I ask myself the questions that also plagued me yesterday. Am I afraid? Will I venture outdoors? Who should I call and what can I do for those more vulnerable than I? I have no answers for these questions, at least none that can flatten the graph line of my anxiety, help me feel better tomorrow than today, or with more hope for rapid recovery. There's still the persistent sniffle released by cottonwood seeds, carried on spring winds. I ask my lungs if they are working as they always have, expanding and contracting to a troubled beat. I wonder if their effort is new or familiar to a place that only exists in the perfect storm of my invention. 1 cup bleach to a gallon water, 1 part dread to 2 of calm, more reason than fear or fear than reason, depending on the headlines, most of which I know I cannot take as absolute truth, but must mix with a healthy dose of critical thought. And I'll end with this poem called Holograms of Hope. Maps, we know, are drawn according to their makers' dreams of grandeur or humility, lands shaped by guile or conquest, vision and gratitude, in turn informing the minds of those who teach their progeny to till their fields, plant and reap on them, sing their songs. Today we have twin maps, Los Angeles struggling beneath pollution's filth, and the same city under a paler cloud as traffic deserts its streets and people shelter from this dread virus. The first blood red, the second barely washed in pale pink. We have such maps of Mumbai, Beijing, and other cities that only weeks ago spewed greenhouse gases into skies made for wind and rain, eagles and clouds. A dearth of planes also brings new air, easier to breathe and kinder to our lungs. When social closeness gives back the human embrace and travel puts us once again hours away from anywhere else on Earth, which of these maps will mirror our cities and which have merely been holograms of hope? Thank you.
Thank you. It's really, really deep to think about what the future and the world and even our maps might look like, huh? All right, we'll get Doris unmuted here. Next up, we've got Doris Fields. She's a performance artist and a poet. a retired adjunct faculty, but still a scholar, an activist in healthcare. She holds a doctorate in international communications, and she's the past president of the New Mexico Humanities Council. All right, Doris, what would you like to read for us today? Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Amanda, and thank you to Bookworks for making this all possible. It's wonderful to be among some wonderful writers, and you know, it's very good to be reading alongside my friend Deb and Margaret, and I've heard some of Pam's work before, so it's really good, and thank you for including me. I'm reading several pieces. The first one, and I'm going to read them all. Basically, I won't. They're a little bit long, so I'm going to. You can let me know if I am running over, and I can shorten things. The first piece is surviving together. My whole way of functioning is, or understanding, is that we are in this whole thing together, and that we have to do it together. Freedom from pain, from injury, death, freedom from planned extinction of Black lives. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. Mother was child, hold the childless mothers, mothers of the dead, sweet and innocent children born of mothers. Tamika Palmer, mother of Breonna Taylor. Allison Jean, mother of Botham Jean. George Floyd called for his mama. His cry resonated with mothers around the world. Larcenia Floyd, mother of George Floyd. He cried for his mother. She was dead, he knew, and soon he would be too. Hold dear mothers of the dead. Witness their pain, feel their pain, understand their struggle. We must try to wear the skin of mothers of the dead. Then we must ask, do the lives of Black mothers matter? How many or how may we demonstrate the mattering of Black lives? Our sweet children of innocence, guts torn by life or bullets or both. Of whom are you the daughter? Of whom are you the son? Who is your mother? Alberta is the mother of Doris. Lucille is the mother of Alberta, and Nellie is the mother of Lucille. Reiteration of trauma stings generations of trauma. Name she of whom you are child. Who is your mother? Mothers of dead children suffer identity crisis. Who is she? Am I she? Is she me? Truly, we must become Tamika Palmer, teetering at the edge of death and pain. Which way shall we go? The death of our souls and that of our daughters, killers, are inextricably linked. A part of us dies night after night. We cannot see stars for the light, but you do not have to be me to support my struggle. We are Allison Jean. Rush of the riverbed blurs our vision. Little lights blind us. A part of us dies night after night. We cannot see the moon for the light. You do not have to be me to look at me. Yet we are and must be the mothers. We are Lucenia Floyd. We stand by a mountain. The oily blood of our son darkened the desert dirt, pasting our history. A part of us dies night after night. We cannot see the stars for the light. You do not have to be me to understand my struggle. You do not have to be me to speak up for me. The double-barrel shotgun, extinction of Black lives. My chances of contracting COVID are less than my chances of being stopped by the police for a minor or non-existent violation. My chances of dying from COVID are less than my chances of dying at the knee, the hand, or laws of white supremacy. We are conjoined. We are in this together, you and I. We, you and I, have PTSD, post-traumatic slavery disorder. Surely they could kill us for this disease. They killed our sons and our daughters. We are walking ghosts. Internal and external death at the hands of trauma, intergenerational trauma, multi-generational trauma. We watch pieces of our lives explode with a double-barrel shotgun. COVID, racism, fear terrorizes the mind. Love, the only healer. Respect, the only vehicle. Bloods run, bloods run. It runs in our veins until the cells petrify and kill us dead. Connection with our ancestors, critical. Sisters and brothers disappeared, stolen in the night and in the daylight. Too many gone by way of disafricanization. Pieces stolen, lives stolen, homelands stolen, full bodies stolen, persecuted and perished by legalized revulsion. The brutal violence of a virus of hatred and brutality. The virus eats at our souls, shreds our sensibilities. Pain we cannot name. We must ask where the pain goes when it goes away. What becomes of that we swallow? Where, oh, where does it go? Where does it go? It goes to our breasts, tainting nourishment of our babies, tainting our pleasure, to our lungs, suffocating us, making us struggle to breathe in the night, to our ovaries, stoning our reproduction, hardening us to ourselves, deafening our will to one another, to our knees, depositing calcium, eroding cartilage, breaking our stride, devouring bone, devouring us, to our hips, shortening our legs, limiting our spirits, endangering our livelihood, imprisoning us in our own cage, fencing in everything, fencing out nothing. Frank Burke is the father of Lucille. Frank Burke died from inside out, his neck shredded by assassin's noose. John Fields is the father of Betsy. John Fields asphyxiated, choked to death by Jim Crow laws. Health is a factor in all our lives. My son could die from the bastardization of love, from the racist worship of hate. In this pandemic, could all lives matter be a truth? We are presented empirical evidence into institutional manifestation of the lie. All lives cannot matter until Black lives matter. Legally and conventionally, the lives of Black people in this country have not mattered except for the Black body's contribution to the wealth of the nation. Evidence, the institutionalization of racism. Evidence, the stealing of Black people from their homelands and the pillaging of the African continent. Evidence, the conscription and legalization of enslavement. Evidence, Jim Crow laws. Evidence, the pipeline to prison, the prison industrial complex that incarcerates disproportionate numbers of Black and brown people. Evidence, the wholesale murder of Black and brown people in their cars, walking their dogs, performing random acts of kindness, relaxing in their homes. Evidence. The documentation is firm that Black lives do not matter. Lives stolen inside the pandemic's stolen lives. We are accidental survivors of an outbreak of hatred and the looting and stealing of lives by those paid to protect us. These murders in the pandemic are neither accident nor mere incident, but exemplary of excused hatred, long-standing otherization. More twins. Inequality stands tall alongside othering. The monstrous head of inequality is multiple and includes historical discrimination and otherization of not only Black and brown people, but also women, all women. Evidence, making Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, indigenous people, poor people, other. Making Muslims, people with disabilities, elders, and youth, other. Making people who are undereducated, Jews, other. Making all single mothers and all members of LGBTQ and questioning youth, Two-Spirit people, community, other. Making all women, other. In this historical pandemic, even white men must be gentried in order to receive high regard. Not to be white, male, Christian, and gentried is also to be other. Get it? Get it. To be subjugated? I repeat, if you are white and Christian or not, and also unrich or poor, you are other. You are, have been, and will be relegated to the other side of the bus along with all of us. We are one. We are one wearing the mask. I learned to wear the mask during the pandemic, long before COVID. It protects me from the deadly force that sickens and kills. For me in the pandemic, I wear the mask. I wear the mask. And here I'm inserting the beginnings of a poem I wrote actually this morning. Not finished. It's called Masking. I don my mask, the one behind my mask, always misconstrued by the outside world. When I smile and laugh, I treat you kindly after you demean me, kick me, do not promote me. When a white man of unearned privilege tells me I'm in over my head, when he does not even know details of the program, perhaps you think me stupid, silly, naive when I smile. Simply, I need to survive, to stay alive, to keep my job. I smile, I wear my mask. I know who I am. I know who I am. When I awake, I do not say to myself, I'm going to wash my black face. I'm going to brush my teeth inside my black mouth. No, I awaken best to classical music. That's me. Preferably it's soft and it's low. I like to lie in bed quietly, feeling me, listening to the sound of my breath as it makes my inhale. Notice the difference when I exhale. Feel the rhythm my heart makes as it beats. Feel the blood move through the veins in my neck. I like me. This beginning to my everyday feeds my calm, my mellow, my caring, my loving, my understanding, my patience. I am educated, therefore regarded as dangerous. A button I saw read, I think, therefore I am. I am a Black woman, and I think, therefore I'm regarded as dangerous. I am dangerous because I am always packing. I am armed with knowledge. Before I leave home, I must don my mask to survive, to stay alive. The pandemic is long and old and ongoing. I wear my mask. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. For this double-barrel shotgun, we will need a multiple-barrel injection, an infusion of love, peace, understanding, harmony, and wisdom. The mask does not guarantee my safety. We need a vaccine, a cure, not just a superficial protection. The beauty of today, this afternoon, this space, this possibility is that we are many and we are varied. We are here to share. I want relief from the pandemics. I seek justice and I seek peace. I work at being peace. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We may find ourselves in any variety of roles with regard to our society's progress. We may be perpetrators, collaborators, bystanders, and or victims. The bystander simply watches. However, watching the perpetration of evil is not simple. In fact, being a bystander can be the most insidious of all. The bystander has an opportunity to play a major role in disrupting evil and unjust acts. I appreciate the quote by Pastor Niemoller that goes something like, first they came for the socialists, but I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unions. I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews and I didn't speak out because I was not a Jew. When they came for me, there was no one left to speak out for me. I believe we must stand up, all stand up, or we fail. We all fail. We fail together. We must speak out against justice. Being silent will not do. To paraphrase author and activist Audre Lorde, our silence will not protect us. And I contend that it never has and it never will. We don't usually think of history as being shaped by silence, but as English Professor Edmund Burke said, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good women and men to do nothing. Silence is dangerous. Standing up and speaking out can be healing. Coming together in any form is commendable. Elie Wiesel, a survivor of the Holocaust, committed himself and called upon us to never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Do not be afraid to stand up and speak out. I will end here with my favorite poem, a quote from my favorite author. When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid.
All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Doris.
Thank you.
That was a strong, powerful witness and a great reminder that we all need to stay in tune, stay awake, pay attention, and keep focused on social justice, even during the pandemic. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to open it up to the open mic now. We'll start out with Tami. Tami DeLand, are you there?
I'm here.
Hi.
Hi. I've got a short flash piece here today called Homebound that I wrote very early in the pandemic during the stay-at-home order. Just an aside, I was getting on a plane for Boulder when the day before the governor there issued the emergency order because I was going to the workshop with Pam Houston and Jared Coe-Brown and Dorothy Allison. So, and then in June, I was in the retreat in Chamonix. So finally I get to say hello to Pam Houston 6 months later. Hello. This is called Homebound. I'm sorry that I don't like puzzles or video games or television shows where people do idiotic, humiliating things to themselves. I like Scrabble, but not if you beat me. I'm sorry that I'm capable of entertaining myself in ways that don't include you. I'm really sorry you think every pot of coffee brewed and every meal set out on the table must originate with me. I'm sorry that when you ask me, what are you going to do today? My impulse is to answer, nothing, nothing ever again. I'm sorry there's nothing new to report. I'm sorry that we're not going to the movies tonight and eating our favorite thin crust pizza. I'm sorry that we aren't driving all the way to Minneapolis to Sunnyside Gardens to buy flats of pansies and petunias and impatiens. I'm sorry that we aren't cooking out for our friends and you're the bartender. I'm sorry this isn't a polar vortex that caught us by surprise, burying us in snow and pelting us with ice. That the quiet outside isn't poetic instead of eerie. I'm sorry you've not broken your leg, or I've not developed a nervous condition that demands secluded bed rest like a Victorian heroine. I'm even sorry that we aren't stranded because you packed away the passports after a move and can't find them in time for Venice. I'm sorry that you said in all seriousness, I don't think I'm gonna make it to 103, as if up until now you had a handle on it. I'm sorry that I have trouble focusing on my books and that I can't keep up on social because every comment I want to make is asshole. I'm sorry that I'm not spending time into letters of gold to be swallowed whole as medicine or art. I'll be sorry when this is all over and all I have to show for it are journal pages dripping in sorry for myself. I'm sorry that I want so much when others have so little. I'm sorry that I resent you when others are alone. I'm sorry that all I want to do is leave, to be anywhere else.
Yay, thank you so much. That was wonderful. All right, next up we have Brenna Gomez. Brenna is another one of our bookseller writers extraordinaire. She was our event MC at Bookworks for several years while she was finishing up her MFA from UNM. And now she's living up in Oregon. Hey, Brenna, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing okay. We haven't seen the sun in nearly a week here from all the smoke with the fires, but we're making it through.
All right. We'll be thinking about you. We're hoping that it rains a lot over the entire Western United States ASAP.
Thank you. I'm going to read a flash piece as well, but so this is one of the only things that I've written during the pandemic, and it's fiction, and it has nothing to do with the pandemic or with current events at all, but I think it captures some of the existential dread of this moment. It's called Eileen. My wife disappeared right before my eyes on the last night of our honeymoon. We hadn't even made love yet. I'd forgotten to make the hotel reservations, and so we had to stay in hostels making our way across Europe. But then at the end, I blew a full half of our budget on a fancy hotel. She just wanted to take a bath first, she said, and I understood this. We were grimy from the train and greasy sausage the Irish eat for their heavy breakfasts, the kind of breakfast that sits in your stomach until early evening, and even then you have to walk miles around the city for them to work their way out. My wife, Eileen, with her short brown hair and impressive dimples, we sipped cheap whiskey from the market down the road in hotel glasses that were awkward in our small hands, and I took photos of her lounging in the fancy bathtub, each curve of her body awash in soft light from the desperately late sunsets this far north. She smiled and laughed and posed and sipped, and I maybe felt the most alive I've ever felt. But then her face changed, a flash of annoyance or pain, like when I jab my elbow under her rib at night when she snores. And the water in the tub began to drain and swirl. And it was then that Eileen's face blurred for just a moment, the strangest moment of my life. My wife looking me in the eye with concern and confusion, and just for a second, something like a wicked bit of fun. And she dissolved, her body a mess of dots churning at the bottom of the tub before disappearing down the drain with a harsh gurgle. I sat on the toilet for a very long time before I drank my whiskey and then hers. She'd set the glass on the edge of the tub closest to the wall. I hadn't yet appreciated the deep blue of the bathroom tile. My wife's loveliness often did that. Rarely did I see anything but her. Even if I was standing in front of the most breathtaking waterfall, it was just her for me, always. But now that she had gone, I crawled into the tub and fished my fingers into the drain, not sure what I expected to find. There was nothing but a dark clump of hair, probably from the last people who'd used the room. And I peered down into the hole, and sometimes if I looked hard enough, I thought I could see a faint purple light. But when I called for her, Eileen wasn't there. I called her name again and again, my mouth right on the drain, so it would carry my voice down into the pipes, if that's even where she was. And I woke there in the tub the next morning, slightly damp, spent days trying to recreate exactly what happened so I could follow her. But I would never be as beautiful as Eileen. My hair was too long and tangled. I could never arch my back just right or lift my hips just so. I mostly drank whiskey alone and woke up when my nose slipped under the water. I finally started telling people that Eileen walked out on me on the last night of our honeymoon because there was no way to explain the disaster that had become my life. And now when I travel for work, I take a bath in every hotel around the world, first peering down the drain and looking for that purple light, hoping that if I drink the perfect amount of whiskey at the right moment of sunset, then I too will become a blur amid a sea of dots and follow Eileen down to the end of this earth or the next one.
Ooh, I love that. How
Thank you.
fun, magical, and weird. Anna,
Thank you.
you're so lucky to have such talented people associated and emeriti of our bookstore, emerita. So we're happy to see you. All right, we've got one more reader that signed up. We've got Gwen Samuels. Let me get her unmuted. Hi, Gwen.
Unmute.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Good. Thanks for signing up. So I hear you're going to read a few minutes from your new memoir. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yes, the memoir is entitled A Second Chance, and it's about my recovery from COVID. Recently, I was hospitalized for 23 days with COVID. I had quite an ordeal, and I was really at the precipice of death, I should say. And I had previously survived cancer, and so when I came out of the hospital, all I could do was write. And I also write poetry, but which if there's time, I would read a poem, but I'd like to read from the memoir. So again, this is A Second Chance, a Black woman's story of recovery from COVID-19.
All right, thank you.
Okay. And this is the beginning of the book. It's called Warning to Readers. If you suffer from white fragility, or if you are in denial about white supremacy, then this book is not for you. If you think Black people should, quote, forget about slavery, unquote, because it was, quote, all in the past, and we're now post-racial, unquote, then this book is not for you. If you do not recognize that the reasons Black people suffer and die disproportionately from COVID-19 and have so many comorbidities are because their immune systems are severely compromised, then this book is not for you. Their immune systems are compromised due to the poisoned food they eat in the standard American diet, due to poisoned water and air in the communities where they live, and due to intergenerational trauma from over 400 years of slavery, brutal oppression, and institutional racism, which continues to this day. If you do not recognize these things, then this book is not for you. After I left the COVID-19 unit for the regular ward, as I lay in my hospital bed recovering, my children called and pleaded with me not to watch the news. I didn't even have to ask them why. I knew another Black person or persons had been shot and killed by police. I complied and did not watch any news as they had asked because I knew it would hurt and anger me and possibly impede my healing. I came home only to learn of the police murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and later George Floyd and Rayshard Brooks, and many others murdered, including Black Lives Matter protesters. Not long after, I heard of a slew of reports of Black people hanging from trees. I'm not convinced that these were coincidences or that these were suicides. I believe they were lynchings meant to terrorize Black people, just like the lynchings of thousands of Blacks prior to the civil rights era. Because I speak of these things does not mean I hate white people. It just means I love Black people. I worry about my people in general, about my Black family, my Black children, and my Black grandchildren in a world that does not love us. So I welcome Black and white readers alike. I think whites, especially truly progressive white people, will find value in what I have to say, because many of you recognize that you also suffer from the very illnesses that our failed capitalist system, based on racism and oppression, imposes on our society. The things I speak about in this book regarding Black people and the need for reparative justice is the truth that I stand on, and there is pain in speaking the truth. If you can't handle my speaking my truth, or if you have an overrated sense of self-importance because of white privilege, but you are still open to learning about the truth that I stand on, then keep reading as a step towards your own liberation. And this is from a subsequent chapter called The Onset, Fried Brains and Ice Chips Gourmet. I went for the free drive-up testing in Albuquerque on March 21st. But they had run out of tests and sent me away. They said if my daughter turned out to be positive, then everyone in the house was assumed to be positive. So I should just stay at home and try to recover. Suddenly I developed a fever of 101. I tried all of the holistic remedies, but nothing seemed to work. I began to lose my appetite. I refused every dish my children brought to me. I could eat nothing but tangerines and ice chips. My feverish body craved the ice chips because they were so delicious and cooling. I couldn't get out of bed for days. On March 24th, my daughter contacted my primary care physician and we held a teleconference. He did not think my symptoms were COVID-19 and prescribed an antibiotic used for the flu, which I took for a few days to no avail. After that first teleconference with my doctor, my fever hovered between 100 and 101, but I was getting progressively worse. As my symptoms worsened, I could no longer eat tangerines, only the ice chips. I couldn't even tolerate the natural remedies anymore. Everything the children brought to me, food, vitamins, tea, I refused. The ice chips gave me so much relief. I felt like I was eating a gourmet meal, and I might have imagined it was as I was getting delirious little by little. I was progressively less aware of how sick I was. The children grew concerned that I could not get out of bed, and I seemed more disoriented and immobile each day. We had another teleconference with my primary care doctor on the morning of March 31st. He advised against going to the hospital, saying it was the last place you wanted to be. On the day of that second teleconference, I began to have light diarrhea, and my fever was up to 103. My daughter was especially vigilant and kept asking, "Mommy, are you having trouble breathing?" Every time I answered, "No." Eventually, she could hear me gasping for breath from her room down the hall. She recognized that I was in respiratory distress and had developed COVID-19 related pneumonia. My awareness of what was happening to me faded. That is the scary part of this disease. You get sicker and sicker, but you think you're okay. However, in reality, your brains are actually being fried. I do remember texting several of my friends and telling them how afraid I was. Another thing I remember in those last few days of being sick at home before going to the emergency room was saying to God, "Please don't take me yet. I don't want to leave my children in despair." At this point, my son and daughter consulted with my oldest son and daughter-in-law in Atlanta. They decided against the advice of my primary care doctor to take me to the hospital. My daughter-in-law, who is a biomedical engineer, explained to my daughter that I was probably experiencing delirium because I was no longer getting enough oxygen to the brain. She and my oldest son insisted that I be taken to the emergency room. Immediately, my daughter called the paramedics. They told her they could not come into the house because of their coronavirus protocol and that they should send me outside alone to be picked up by the ambulance. The children didn't want to send me outside alone because I couldn't even walk on my own. So they called the hospital emergency room to alert them that we would be coming in by car. They were instructed to drive up to the ambulance entrance and told the staff that the staff would meet us outside. All I remember of later that night of March 31st, 2020, is getting out of my Jeep and into a wheelchair, then being rolled into the emergency room of Presbyterian Rust Medical Center in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, about 7 miles from my home in Albuquerque. I don't remember what the emergency room looked like inside, nor do I remember the faces of the doctors who treated me. My son and daughter waited in the parking lot a while and then called their older brother in Atlanta. They cried together a lot. When they got back home, my daughter called the hospital and a doctor told her that I had been intubated, put on a ventilator, and placed into a medically induced coma. The doctor told her that there is a 20% chance of people surviving after being intubated. At first, my daughter was furious. She was under the impression that the doctor should have called the family before intubating in case the patient had any last words or wishes. But she quickly realized that the doctors made this decision to save my life, which was ebbing out of my body slowly. My daughter politely responded to the doctor, "Thank you, but we're not concerned about the 20% chance because we know for a fact that our mother is going to survive." When I arrived to the hospital, my blood oxygen level was down to 53, and the norm should be 95 to 100, but certainly not below 88. Soon she reconciled herself with the fact that they had done the right thing by intubating me, and they eventually saved my life. And this is from one more subsequent chapter. It's a short section. What I do remember clearly during intubation is leaving my body, floating upwards to rest on a perch above my bed, and watching myself as I was holding on to my life. I remember hearing the voices of my 3 little grandchildren calling, "Grandma, Grandma, Grandma." I remember feeling their little hands tugging on my hospital gown. Then I could feel and hear a tremendous vibration that seemed to be traveling the world on the wind. The vibration sounded almost like Gregorian, Islamic, or Buddhist chanting. And then a voice said to me, "They're praying for you." I knew then that those vibrations were prayers from all over the world in many different languages, but they had melded into one unified sound, one strong, united vibration. Next, I heard a voice say to me, "Gwen, come back. We love you. We don't want you to go yet." Many people who have had near-death experiences, as this might be called, report them as causing fear as they struggle to stay alive and make it back into their bodies. However, as I was sitting up there on that perch, I think I must have been smiling. I felt like God was saying, "Just sit here a while with me, darling. Just rest. I got you." I felt safe. I knew that the prayers and vibrations would bring me back safely into my body. After I was extubated, my daughter told me all the people they had contacted who were praying for me from everywhere: Baha'i prayers, Muslim prayers, Christian prayers, Hindu prayers, Yoruba prayers. There were prayers from across the United States, prayers from international prayer groups, prayers from all parts of the African continent, and prayers in English, Farsi, Spanish, Arabic, Amharic, Tigrinya, and Isiskosa. I believe that while I was up there on that perch, I was right at the edge or the border between this world and the next world of God. Even long after I was extubated, I could feel and hear the vibration of those prayers, especially when I was about to fall off to sleep. It may seem strange, but after I was extubated and discovered that it was a Nigerian doctor trained in Cuba who had intubated me, I thought about the fact that I recently traced my maternal African lineage to a Hausa woman. Maybe the ancestors had a hand in this as well.